Hi, Tia.
Good evening, ma'am. How are you?
I'm good.
Okay, are you able to hear me clearly?
Absolutely. Am I clear?
Yes, yes, perfect.
All right.
Um, okay, so we have a fair number of people who've tuned in. Good evening, everyone. Let's start off with welcoming our speaker for the session. Uh, so today we are joined by Dr. Smriti Singh, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Social Sciences and Humanities at Indraprastha Institute of Technology, Delhi. She teaches Sociology of India and Gender and Media courses. She's a Fulbright-Nehru Scholar, 2015-2016. Her doctoral work, soon to be published as a book, explores issues of post-liberalisation, urbanization, and class. Her current research work is focused on the broad areas of gender, space, and mobility. A very, very warm welcome to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you. So today's session discusses your article, which focuses on themes of how the media in India currently reports crimes against women, and you take, of course, much broader issues into concern. Um, so first off, in your article, you make a sharp observation that instead of focusing on the perpetrator, we instead take in the choices of victim and, to quote you, a more sophisticated obsessing about the victim. In that, instead of blaming the victim, we reconstruct her life as a series of naive, bad choices. What do you think is the problem with the current media reportage of crimes against women in India?
So the way that I also explore this in the article, I focus on two aspects. One is how it individualizes crimes against women. So this becomes about this particular woman in this particular space making these kind of choices, leading to the kind of fate. So it, in certain ways, it's a more sophisticated way of victim blaming, is what I argue in the article as well, which is to say that you made a series of naive choices which led you to the kind of fate that you met.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of situation then allows for an emotional addressing of the incident. So the focus then is to mourn, if not violently avenge it. And so it takes away from very structural kind of issues that lead to some kind the patterns of crimes against women, or setting them in a larger context of the kind of crimes against women that we've been seeing of late.
Absolutely.
The second is that it in the reconstruction and reenactment of these choices. I mean, it's hard to miss the fact that this is slightly voyeuristic. We it panders to a very voyeuristic gaze that as a society we want into women and the choices they make.
Absolutely.
So it just it's kind of both in that sense.
Yeah, I like the way you use the word voyeuristic, because at the end of the day, it's almost pandering. Like, you're not focusing on the issue at hand, and what we're actually as a society struggling with, which is the deep endemic violence against women, be it in intimate settings or in public spaces.
Correct. I mean, it just uses these choices of women against them as a way of arguing that, well, if you were making naive choices, that there is an inevitability of what follows. Incidentally, and this is important for us to think in terms of viewers, but also as scholars who are looking at media or studying media, is that this trope kind of keeps changing. So this is not a trope that applies to women as a homogeneous category,
Right.
but this is a specific kind of way in which crime against middle class women in urban settings is kind of covered. There are other similar tropes, and depending on the social backgrounds of the victim and the perpetrator, there are different frames that are invoked. But this again is very focused around middle class women in urban settings.
Right. Right. And I also feel that even though all these personal facts might be displayed through the media, how much of the victims' lives do we understand? How much of their challenges do we really understand? through these specific facts that are shooted out to us through newspaper headlines.
Absolutely, I agree with you. There is very little that we understand contextually. It's a decontextualized reconstruction of women's lives to pander to a kind of middle class, patriarchal anxiety around women who are now experiencing modernity and want to participate in a more modern discourse. And therefore, it is not meant to contextually understand women's lives. This is not a research kind of an endeavor wherein we are trying to understand deeply women's experiences holistically.
Exactly.
We are rather interested in knowing intimate details, uncomfortable details about women who are unknown to us. So it's equal part voyeuristic and in equal part it is pandering to a very patriarchal anxiety about young women, modern women in urban setting, experiencing a certain kind of economic independence, a different kind of mobility pattern. And so it is also pandering to the kind of anxieties that emerge from there.
Absolutely. You also write about how in the post-liberalization phase, the news media had importantly transformed from being a state's mouthpiece to being one that is run as a business model. How does this sort of revenue model influence the kind of reporting and the news that is made available to us?
Um, so the way that I think about it is we can look at it at two levels. One is the more broader level in terms of understanding the kind of controls that there are on media outlets and the information that is divulged to the masses. So, of course, all of us are familiar with the editorial review and control, which is then the credibility of the channel or the media outlet and the peer journalistic review keeps a control over this kind of editorial review process. So you cannot just not be speaking truth, or you cannot just wildly go in the direction of opinions. You have to deeply base it in evidence. So there is that for editorial review and control. There is the state control, which can exist in two ways. It can be the state-owned media channel, or it could be, say, for instance, regulatory bodies, laws governing the kind of material that can be shown, or the way in which it is presented to the masses. There is a third bit, which is slightly more relevant to us, considering the kind of times that we're living in. It is the financial control or the funding allocation. And so this can be done two ways. There is a corporate political nexus that operates. There are big, giant corporates that have vested interest in channels, and because there is a possibility of profit. But they also are invested strongly in funding political parties. And therefore, there is a nexus there. Now, why is that important? One thing is through direct ownership or financial control of media houses, you can always set the agenda of how certain kind of information will be divulged. The second way, in which is the way that we are more familiar with, is through allocation of funds for advertisement. So advertisement drives media houses in the directions of, where you can get maximum viewership, because advertising then only works if more people are watching you. So that is one level. What is relevant for this kind of coverage is the TRP, the viewership rating for media channels. And to keep the TRPs consistently high, or which essentially translates to how long do you keep tuned in and how consistently you tune into a media channel. And therefore, to keep bringing you back to a particular news media channel, I would need to speak to the kind of fears that you have. I would need to keep you engaged, keep you titillated, so to say. And therefore, both those things work in exactly the ways that I talked about, in either pandering to patriarchal anxiety or by kind of titillating this desire for voyeuristic gaze into women and their lives and their choices that are not known to us.
Absolutely. So the entire attention of the news media houses then just to capture our attention by any means possible.
Yes, so it's a little bit on us
Right.
as a, I mean, it just doesn't reflect media. It also reflects what kind of things we respond to.
Absolutely.
We are, how interested are we in knowing intimate details about a woman who is otherwise unknown to us?
Absolutely. You also raise a very poignant question when you ask how much detail is actually too much detail when reporting a crime that is violent and brutal. And you refer to Shraddha Walkar's case. Why are we constantly flooded with information about the victims' lives? Do you think it can be attributed to a larger lack of regulation in the media?
Of course, there's a definite lack of any kind of control or regulation of this kind of coverage of how long she was kept, or how long, what she went through leading up to her very violent demise. But there's definitely there is a lack of structural regulation. But I also want to emphasize that while there is a lot of detail which is available, we also don't know much about these women. We don't know anything about the kind of context in which they made certain kind of choices. And I emphasize this in my write-up. I mentioned that the kind of coverage that we currently see, it also covers women as this entity, this very patriarchal sensibility of looking at women, wherein house is somehow, or home is somehow imagined as safe space, which, if we go by NCRB data, is not a very well-founded assumption. We also imagine families to be extremely enabling spaces. And then women's choices are read as rebellious. And these rebellious choices are then reconstructed and deconstructed in the sense of being called naive, just reactionary, emotional, ill-founded. So we base our judgment about the woman based on details that are made available to us outside of the context of understanding her life and whatever might have led to certain kind of choices.
There's also this question of where they're obtaining these, bits and pieces of information from in the first place, right? Who is out there checking of these facts?
I think there is some kind of a obsessing about how the natal families of women are somehow the best people to weigh in about their character, their persona, and that rests itself on an extremely problematic assumption that women necessarily have very harmonious relationships within their natal homes. While that might be true for some, evidence suggests that that's not a very well-founded idea.
Right.
It just, I mean, this kind of detailing outside of the context, it just goes to pander to a very patriarchal anxiety, but it also reinforces different kind of controls that other women are likely to face. So it has very real repercussion for other women who are probably returning back home to their families, watching this deconstruction of the victim's life in minute detail, presenting her as a naive individual who's incapable of making rational choices and needs a patriarchal guidance. And then that kind of plays out in other women's lives. It has very real repercussions for how you, I, or other women who are young and are living in cities are experiencing control and regulation of their mobility, their sexuality, their access to technology, or how long they can stay out, how many friends can they have, whether a party is going to be okay or not.
Yeah. So you also, I like that you talk about, that assumption that we work on as a society, or even as policymakers or lawmakers, that the family is necessarily a safe space for women. In the pandemic also, we saw this being highlighted quite a bit when the National Commission for Women helplines were overflooded with new homes, when that home is not a space, and now that the women are stuck with the perpetrators in close proximity and they have nowhere to leave, the situation only worsened.
Exactly.
So I think on a very deep level that needs to change, and we need to start imagining women as individuals and not just as cogs in the larger wheel of the
Yeah,
family.
of course.
Uh, you also point out that whenever such instances are reported, narratives of fathers should more closely police the choices of their daughters emerge. However, is restricting women's mobility really going to ensure their safety? And how can we women enjoy equal to employment, to freedom, without this access to secure public spaces?
That's exactly correct. Women in, at least middle class women, largely upper caste middle class women in urban areas, experience this paradox wherein restrictions are necessary condition for effective enjoyment of freedoms. And therefore, it's for your own good. It's always presented as in your own best interest. And unless women completely believed that it is their individual responsibility, it is no way the responsibility of the state or the society to ensure a safe access to public spaces, but also equal opportunities for women in every sense. It would become very difficult to imagine a scenario where women did not buy into this argument and are allowing. And so this kind of fear and this kind of fear mongering that happens with so in the news coverage, what happens is that your naive choices are used as somehow leading up to a really bad outcome, and therefore it since it's presented as that. It opens the possibility of one deconstruction of all kind of choices by the family for women, which they do not have much control over, but also this reevaluation in your own head of the kind of choices that you are making, because this is constructing. Again, it is obsessing about details that might not have become problematic had we had structures that ensure that women can safely experience these choices. So, yes. So essentially, I'll go back to what I said, that this kind of has an assumption that one, homes are safe spaces. This kind of framing, what it does is that it makes you also go in a frame wherein you are questioning your own choices. It allows for it does the foundational work for families to or patriarchal control within the families to have an insane amount of interference in women, their lives, their choices, their mobility, in the name of keeping one safe. Um, it's so it's not just about obvious control. It also has to do with effective convincing of women that this kind of surveillance and control is in their best interest.
Right.
And so this kind of framing does that effectively.
Absolutely. Do you also feel that okay, so there's an audience member who's asked an interesting question, which is also confounding at the same time, that how do you think we can construct the family a more safer place for women? This is a session.
We need a lot of work, but I mean, I think we were going in the right direction as far as if you look at the Domestic Violence Act. It went quite far in constructing or in challenging the assumption that somehow natal families are extremely safe spaces for women. So it allowed for the possibility of women to file protection against their own natal family. However, in the years following, we haven't done anything much to either strengthen it We also understand that the law enforcement deeply, deeply suffers from a patriarchal bias themselves. So we're less likely to be heard and understood and taken seriously if we are approaching, say, law enforcement with a complaint against a father or a brother. Um, so you have to still deal with those kind of attitudes, and we did not do much beyond, say, the DVA Act. So there is a long way to go for us.
Do you think, adding on to that, do you think representation then becomes very critical of representation of women in these spaces in the first place, be it the narratives that are being constructed behind these opaque media houses or the legislatures or other spaces of the law?
I mean, it would be very naive of me if I were to say yes, just the representation would do it. We have seen in the past that a lot of times these extremely problematic coverage has been done by women anchors. So I don't think that in and of itself does it. I do believe that more women and their representation, and in fact, the representation of more historically disadvantaged communities, and a more intersectional approach is needed just for the sake of making women feel safer. So with the coming of crime against women cell, it became safer for women to at least try, and if you really need it, push yourself to go there. It hasn't gone further because it needs some kind of re-education alongside. Just the presence won't do, because patriarchy is not something that only exists in men. Like I said, unless and until women largely believed that this is in their own personal good, it would be hard to sell that agenda.
Right, absolutely. And patriarchy doesn't work at just one level or one sphere of life which you can isolate.
Absolutely.
That needs to be tackled in a very nuanced manner. So what are some of the structural changes and perhaps regulations that you could suggest for reporting crimes against women in India?
There's definitely a need for regulation. I will not make two ways about it. We need some kind of regulations the same way that we have we have had some headway with respect to at least media houses not divulging identifiable information about victims of sexual assault or sexual violence. That needs to be extended so that the kind of obsessive, compulsive deconstruction and reenactment of women, their choices, should somewhere stop. There should be a right to privacy, even for women, whether they are victims or they do. I mean, they are deceased. There should be some control over this kind of interference in their WhatsApp messaging, in their Facebook, in their dating apps. It's just absolutely unnecessary. Doesn't add anything useful to this kind of reporting other than pandering to anxieties.
Absolutely.
But other than that, there is definitely, I mean, I would say that there was a lot of work that women's movement in India did. There are NGOs who have done extremely good work. PILs have been previously extremely useful way of moving the state to formulate structural mechanisms by which you can make the space, the urban space, a lot better accessible to women and more respectful. So there is that definitely, but nothing can really change unless the viewers begin to question these framing, these ways of speaking about women, being less invested in the choices and deconstructing lives of women that are unknown to us otherwise. And this requires, it then falls upon the informed critical citizenry. I mean, I would say that therefore it's very important for public intellectuals to be speaking about this, to be engaging with these ideas. But yeah, I think the most resilient kind of change would be if we can bring change in the attitudes of viewership in raising questions like these so that it makes you reflect on what is it that you're tuning into.
Absolutely. Very, very well put, ma'am. I think we need to reflect and reflect deeply on all of these points, and to keep the conversations flowing. Like, I don't think there's one single truth that we can arrive at any point in time, but we can definitely work on building better families, building better um, public spaces, building better offices that accommodate the choices of women and that allow for them to function safely without fear.
So I mean, I would say that raising these questions is important because it lays down the foundation for people to think and reflect on what are the ways in which these lives are being reconstructed. What is the usefulness of the kind of information that is being provided through these media channels? And therefore lay the foundation for more structural kind of changes. Say, for instance, workplace changes, making it important, say, for instance, if you know about a victim of domestic abuse, to be able to redirect them to agencies that can help, to formulate NGOs, to fund NGOs that can help women who are not in a married setup, who are living with their intimate partners, making intimate partner violence just something that women can talk about without facing the stigma of not being married, or experiencing intimacy or imagining intimacy strictly within marriage. It's important to open those dialogues. It's important to have structural mechanisms by which women can safely experience the choice of living in. That was not the focus. That was not at all the focus. Um, so, so having agencies or NGOs, funding NGOs that can help women who are facing intimate partner violence, but also educating law enforcement to be effectively able to help victims of intimate partner violence. Because there were many signs. And in whatever happened, she laid bare the ways in which we are failing women, but those were not the focus.
Exactly. Very well said, ma'am. And I think there's lots that needs to be reflected. Um, and with that, I think we can call it a wrap to this session. Anyone who is interested in reading Dr. Smriti's article, it's very much available on our website. And while we're at it, please do subscribe to EVW and follow us on our social media channels. Thank you so much again for your time, Dr. Smriti. It was wonderful talking to you.
It's my pleasure, Tia. Thank you.
Thank you.